Hello YouTube, my name is Zach, and you guys have asked and asked for me to do a controversial video. Well, here it goes. I'm telling you right up front, this one's going to be a little bit dicey compared to what you've experienced in the past. Today I'm analyzing James Hetfield of Metallica. Now, granted, James had an extremely long career, and he has made a long time singing the way that he does, relatively speaking. Today, I'm going to be talking about his technique when he was earlier in his career. Now, I'm not a huge Metallica fan. I've heard enough to think that their earlier stuff is better than their later stuff, but I'm not as super well versed on all the Metallica stuff like a lot of you guys are. So, if I say something that's slightly inaccurate, please feel free to correct me, but I did my best to do a little bit of research and due diligence to sort of understand where some of this is coming from. A few things, I'm going to say it up front. James Hetfield has poor vocal technique. That does not mean that James Hetfield is a bad singer or a bad performer. There's a massive difference between being a bad singer and having bad technique. When we talk about technique, we're talking about sustainability and health factors. Throughout James's entire career, he's been riddled with vocal issues, vocal injuries. He's been put on vocal rest. He's had to have voice therapy. He's had mild operations and surgeries on his voice. It's just gone on and on and on and on because he's never found a consistent, stable technique that was sustainable. The reason for this is the style. When you sing in the style of singing that James Hetfield does, you're going to have vocal health issues. It just comes with the territory. So my purpose in this analysis and in this video is to show some of you some of the hallmark things that he does that are destructive. So that way, if you want to sing in this style, if you want to sing in the metal genre and the metal style, you can at least avoid some of these pitfalls that will definitely cause you long-term vocal issues. If you've never seen one of my videos before, you need to understand that this is an objective vocal analysis. I'm a professional voice teacher. I teach voice students all day, every day, and I work at a studio in Atlanta where I get voice students all the time from all different backgrounds, all ages, all genders, and so I've worked with a little bit of everything, and I understand that some of you are very big fans of James Hetfield and big fans of Metallica, and I am not trying to dissuade you from enjoying their music. My goal here is strictly to show you the things that have caused James problems over his career. Now, he does a lot of things really well. He's an excellent frontman. He does a really good job of balancing out his singing with the playing. That's something that's really hard to do, especially considering how difficult and complex their music tends to be. He does a great job of that. He's got great projection. There are a lot of things about his voice that are very good, but my subscribers and my followers, you people have asked me to analyze someone that I think has poor technique, and a lot of you have asked me to analyze James Hetfield. I find that the two link together. He doesn't have great technique, and he is extremely highly requested. So since those two have converged, here we are. Just don't take this personally. I'm not attacking James Hetfield as a musician at all. I think that Metallica is a pioneer of the genre, and anyone who argues otherwise is ridiculous. They've basically built a genre with their bare hands from the ground up, and they've inspired millions and billions of musicians around the globe for decades. So I'm not taking away James Hetfield's influence or his musicianship. I am simply pointing out the things that have caused him vocal problems over the past 20 or 25 years. I'm being redundant because I want to drive this point home before some of you get in the comments and say things like, oh, you don't sing for a living. How could you know? Actually, I kind of do sing for a living. I just sort of teach it while I do it. But anyway, no, I don't go out and tour every night. No, I don't go out and perform for millions of people every night. But that does not inhibit me from teaching voice. If not being a professional performer and singing in front of, sold out crowds doesn't qualify you to teach, then what does it take to be a teacher? There's all sorts of people who aren't famous for their professions that can still do it well. So I understand that I am a nobody in Atlanta that teaches at a music studio that has never done anything on the grand stage. I understand that. That does not mean that I can't teach about the voice. So please don't come at me with those arguments because they just don't work. Anyway, so now that that's out of the way, let's get to the analysis. This is Master of Puppets in 1989, and I went through a lot of videos of his to try to find something that was well recorded and did a pretty good job of showing his vocal technique. There were a lot of really blurry videos, a lot of videos that you couldn't hear very well, and I thought this one was about as good as I could find. And I wanted to find something that sort of fit into that little sweet spot of when Metallica was quote unquote at their peak, when James was probably at the strongest vocally, and also was clear enough to be seen and heard. Most of the stuff from like right after Master of Puppets, the album released, was almost impossible to follow in terms of a vocal technique perspective. So I left those out and I went with this, even though it's a little bit later and there's already some signs of vocal decay. If I'm not mistaken, James got some vocal coaching in the early 90s because his voice was showing major problems. He had, I think, developed a vocal nodule, and he had to work that out, and his entire approach to singing was changed. Now, I will tell you now that that new approach wasn't necessarily the healthiest either, but it was more sustainable than what he was doing. Like I said, he's had several times throughout his career, up to now even, where he's had to go on vocal rest and he's had vocal injuries. Even last year, a year ago this time, he was on vocal rest for several months because his otolaryngologist, his ENT, was telling him, hey, you got to stop. What you're doing is still hurting you. So part of the vocal damage element comes with the territory of the genre, and I do understand that going in. Like I said, before we get into this, my goal is to show you some of the things that you can try to avoid to make your performances more sustainable over the long term. It's great that James has been able to have a full career, but he's in his 50s, and 55 is still somewhat young to be having the kind of vocal decay that he does. Someone who healthily maintains their voice usually doesn't start seeing the kind of decay that he is until they're early to mid 60s. So he's done a good job of maintaining his voice over 30 years, 3 decades of singing metal. But, you know, he is suffering the consequences now. And if you do watch some of their more recent performances, it's spotty to say the least. So without further ado, this is Master of Puppets in 1989. I'm editing a lot of things, copyright reasons. Please don't come after me, Lars Ulrich. I know you protect your music like it's your baby, so please don't come after me. I'm just trying to help. Okay, so I'm not going to let that phrase finish because there's already something really important to point out here, and it's a combination of factors. His posture for singing is very poor, and I say that because his shoulders here are leaned forward, and his body is curved forward as a result. Now, I know that playing guitar, it looks cool to have your guitar down that low, and he's got pretty long arms, so he can sort of get away with it. But when your guitar is pulling you down and making your posture like seep forward to where the shoulders are curved, that's typically a sign that you need to do something a little bit different. You need to have vertical alignment when you sing. And the reason it's so important that you have vertical alignment when you sing is that there is a direct line of things that happen between the diaphragm, the lungs, the throat, the mouth. And there is a specific coordination that happens every time you create sound, whether you're singing or speaking, it doesn't matter. And so every little bend that you have in that alignment affects the efficiency of the sound and of the ability for it to be created. So a lot of singing is just consistency and developing something that is consistently sustainable. When you bend forward, your lungs collapse inward a little bit. Your lungs collapse inward because the amount of space that your core has to support everything gets smaller. So your lungs can't expand as much as they could if you're standing upright. As a result, even if the diaphragm moves all the way down, you still aren't going to be able to get as full of breath because the lungs just don't have as much room to operate as when you stand up straight. So it's super important that you stand up straight when you sing and you have good vertical posture so that you can get the full breath. You have the maximal breath support when you sing. So posture and breath support are directly linked. Also, whenever you have kind of curves in your stances or in your posture, the neck gets misaligned. And when the neck gets misaligned, the process of creating sound and that sound traveling up the larynx and out the mouth, it all gets sort of disrupted. It's all about efficiency, and it's all about having a clean mode of transition from the throat out the mouth. Ideally, there should be only one real major bend that the sound has to travel through. And so if you do things like, have a low larynx, have a raised soft palate, the sound travels up through the back of the mouth and back down out the mouth. And so it kind of has one flow, sort of arc motion that the vibration has to travel through when it comes out of the mouth. But when things are curved up and bent all around, you can feel muscle groups in the throat other than just down here where you sing engaging and trying to hold things in place for the sound to travel through. So if you even try it for yourself, if you like bend your head and you talk, you can feel things kind of down here start welling up and tightening up. That's all extra engagement that muscles are having to do around the folds to keep the sound aligned and balanced. So ultimately what that can do is create something called muscle tension dysphonia. And muscle tension dysphonia is where muscles around the folds engage unnecessarily. There's a very specific structure of musculature that engages at the folds and around the folds. And that musculature has a very fine balance of weight distribution and pressure distribution. So when that gets disrupted, what ends up happening is the muscles around start trying to pick up the slack. But since the muscles around your throat are already designed to do things like, well, hold your head up, kind of hold the structure in place, when they start engaging to help the process of phonation, well, that's not something they're super great at. It's very similar to the whole lift with your legs, not your back concept. If you just start pulling from your back, well, sure, your back can, carry the weight, but it's unnecessary strain. So you're going to have back problems if you lift from your back too much. It's the same concept. If your muscles are engaging in ways they don't naturally do, once or twice it won't hurt you. But if you make a habit of singing hour-and-a-half long or 2-hour-long shows where you are setting your body up to do this, you're going to have muscular dysfunction problems in the future. And so I'm not a doctor. I'm not a voice therapist. I'm not an otolaryngologist. I'm a voice teacher, but I do know what these trends lead to. And with the types of vocal issues that James has had throughout his career, I'm certain that muscle tension dysphonia is a major element of it just because of the way that he stands. Your posture is of paramount importance when you sing. So here, the biggest thing that I would say is that if you're going to be singing this style of music, set yourself up to where your posture is working to your advantage. Part of it is the placement of his microphone. The microphone's low and he has to bend forward to reach it. It's just like one of the things that when I was in like choirs and things in college is we were always taught to have our music stands up to where we don't have to bend forward to see. It's the same thing. You want to set your microphone up to where you don't have to lean forward so much and you can just sort of keep things vertical and aligned. It's all about efficiency and sustainability. The more muscles you use, the less efficient you will be, the less sustainable you will be. It's a very simple concept, but I just want you guys to understand that this is kind of the structure and the foundation of why he's had these problems. It starts from posture and it goes to everything else. We haven't even started talking about his actual singing method yet. This is the first thing that he would really need to fix or get a handle on to be able to have more sustainable technique. So let me go back. I went too far. I wanted to point something else out here that I saw. So here it is. Now, look at his knees. His knees are bent. Now, I mean, I know don't skip leg day. Like, I get it. You got to get your leg workouts in, but all you're doing is putting unnecessary work on your body. A big part of singing is engaging your core muscles to keep some of that load and that weight balanced throughout the body. One thing that I actually do when I sing, if I'm singing like opera or I'm singing something like very vocally demanding, is I will put my right foot slightly in front of my left one and just barely flex my right quad muscle, because what it does is it just helps me keep my lower core muscles better engaged so that I can spread some of that workout throughout my body more. But what he's doing is overdoing it because he's disrupting his posture. He has he kind of has his groin pushed up and he has his quad muscles very heavily engaged where he's bending. That's just creating more work under his core. The lower body should be a support structure, not something that you're constantly engaging while you sing. Because if you start feeling weak in your legs and you start feeling weak in your lower core, well, then it's not going to be as good at supporting the rest of the body above it, which means that the entire structure is going to be less efficient. So as you can see, I'm kind of being redundant here, I'm aware, but his posture is a major problem with his singing. I'm sure that if he had developed a singing technique early where he was more upright and he wasn't bent down like this, it probably would have sustained his voice a whole lot longer because the rest of his body wouldn't have had to do so much work all the time. He's putting so much extra work on himself by standing the way that he does. It's unnecessary and it causes way more muscle tension and way more muscle usage than he needs to be able to sing. Okay, yeah. So here's the tension thing. You can see his forehead, like you can see his eyes and his forehead super tight. You can see, look at the cheek muscles. They're raised up. They're very tight. His nose is raised up. So effectively what facial structure he's making is like, he's kind of going like this when he sings. So when you do that, you can feel the tension up here well up. You can feel the tension in the muscles down here pulling upward. It tightens everything up. Trying to sing from that tight of a position is very bad for you because it doesn't allow the freedom for the rest of the voice to operate. Anytime you're doing something that tightens the muscles up in the upper half of the face and up the upper top of the voice, it constrains everything. It doesn't actually allow for the voice to function in a natural way because everything is adjusting to all those extra muscles. Think about trying to drive in traffic, if really heavy traffic. If the traffic weren't all there, you could drive straight down the road at 60 miles an hour or whatever. I work in Atlanta, so trust me, I know traffic. If there's no traffic there, you can just go down the interstate or whatever at whatever speed. But if there's a bunch of traffic there, well, you're jammed up and you have to make these weird lane changes and you have to kind of move around everything a lot. When you tighten all your muscles like that, it's the same thing. The sound just wants to travel from down here out the mouth. But when you tighten all this stuff up around it, you have to re-navigate around. You have to change your coordination. You have to change your efficiency. All these things kind of work in concert. And another thing is just simple. Working muscles makes them break down. It's the same reason if you lift weights, eventually, if you keep doing it, your arms get really sore. Things like lactic acid builds up on those muscles and they start tearing. So, I mean, of course, they get stronger as time goes on. But if you're trying to sing and you're engaging muscles in a way to where things like lactic acid start building up because you're engaging them so much, you are going to have a vocal breakdown. And the muscles that we're talking about in this group are so tiny that they can't afford too much damage. If you damage this stuff too much, it is really bad for you because these muscles don't rebuild and get stronger the same way that like your arm muscles do. These types of muscles tend to rupture and tear. And when that happens, you have major injuries. So when you combine all of these factors so far together, it's pretty easy to see why James has had these kinds of issues. And I mean, we're only, 20, 30 seconds into his singing, and I'm already seeing these things that are just collectively a cocktail of vocal disasters waiting to happen. Now, again, I know I'm bashing him, but the guy's a great performer. He could rile up a crowd and rouse a crowd like nobody's business. He was an amazing musician. So I'm not saying that he's not a good musician. He's not a good singer. What I'm saying is that technically speaking, from the concepts of vocal health, vocal sustainability, vocal efficiency, he basically doesn't have any at all. Could he develop it if he'd wanted to? I'm sure he could, but for the style, for the genre, he made the choice that, these things didn't matter until someone came in and told him, hey, you've got to make some adjustments. But even then, he didn't sell out and go all the way down into the healthy realm, to the healthy category. He never did that. And now his voice is really paying the price for it. So it's a series of decisions that you have to make. And I guess the aggressive, tense stuff just comes with the territory. But I'm a firm believer that these things can be done without that kind of vocal strain being put on you. I firmly believe that. Or at least not as much as what James is bringing on himself. Yeah, same thing there. You saw it really quickly. Like when he sung Obey Your Master, he had his head way down like that. So, just do it. Try that out. If you're singing, one day, just bend your head down and see how different it feels from when your head is lined up. You'll see for yourself exactly what I mean by that. You can already hear when he's singing. I wish it would show him more so that I could do more analysis. But if you listen to when he sung the word strings, he opened way up on string. He kind of went strings. And I'm not going to demonstrate because he's upper baritone. I don't do that aggressive singing stuff, but he did stray. He opened way up on the word strings and the pitches were kind of wobbly. You're already seeing signs that the way that he's singing is affecting his efficiency of his sound and his vocal consistency. If you go back and listen to that phrase again, you'll hear that some of the pitches were starting to become flat. And if you watched my Messiah Mark Collin video last time, I kind of pulled up a diagram that showed how you should handle vowels when you start moving up into the higher range of the voice. As a matter of fact, let's pull that out right now, and I will kind of give you guys a breakdown how James is approaching his vowels here. So here's my little handy dandy vowel modification chart that I built to kind of of show how vowels should be used at different points of the range. I'm not going to go super in-depth as to how to read this because I already did that in the Messiah Marcolin video. If you want to understand it a little bit more, then go back and watch that. But just as a briefly speaking, when you talk about vowel shapes, when the male and female voices start converging in ranges, you want to alter or modify the vowels that are used. So as the male voice goes up and it starts moving toward that passaggio where it moves from the chest voice to the head voice, you typically want to narrow the vowels out. So when he sung the word strings, stri is a more closed vowel. So it would make sense that you would keep the embouchure and the vowel more closed when you move up the range. So when he went stre, he kind of opened up to an almost an like an kind of a combination of the two, which is a more open vowel. If you look at the diagram and the way that the typical vowel modification method works, when you open your vowels, it actually is counterproductive to moving into the passaggio range. So by him opening the vowel more, it does him a disservice. Now, if it were a girl singing it and she were moving up and she expanded her vowel, that's fine because that suits the structure of the female voice more. But it doesn't fit the structure of the male voice to open the vowel more. When you go up and you're on a word like strings, you want to keep it to an I, not because you can see the difference in my embouchure. You can see how it widens. I would say the way that he's approaching that vowel is even widening outward because it has this kind of quality. It's like kind of like that. So it sounds to me like he's widening his mouth shape and his embouchure as well, which is also destructive when you're seeing in the high range. You want narrow, more closed vowels and lip shapes when you move up the passaggio. So that's something that probably was destructive to some extent. If that's the way that he approached moving up his voice, if he widened way out and opened way up, that's probably not that great either. The reason that it's kind of detrimental to men to open up more is that the shape that the vocal tract makes and the shape that the mouth and the resonator shape is more conducive to more closed vowels, and that's an entire lesson in and of itself. It would take a long time for me to explain, so I'm not really going to go into that right now, but effectively the shape that's made in the structure is more conducive to closed vowels than it is open vowels. And so if you are contrary to that and you make a more open shape, it's not conducive to that higher range, because once you hit a certain point in the voice, the structure starts setting itself up to move into the head voice, because that's what the body naturally wants to do. When you speak or sing really high pitches, it wants to move into the head voice / falsetto sound. It doesn't want to stay in the modal kind of configuration where things are more open. So when you move up and you're widening your vowels like that, your body kind of has to overcompensate by tightening things up, stretching certain parts of the musculature in the vocal folds beyond what they naturally would, just to be able to sing these specific vowels. The folds and the structures themselves aren't very good at holding on and maintaining themselves at high frequency levels with a more open position like that. So that's kind of a brief rundown as to why opening up something like the word strings is bad for you. Once, twice, no big deal. But if you're making an entire concert or entire tour out of doing these kind of things, it's absolutely destructive in the long term. Anyway, let's go back to the video. So actually on the word thing, I kind of stopped in the middle, but he's using an vowel, can't see a th. That's actually not too bad if you're in your mid voice. An vowel is okay, it's more neutral. Now, if you were going up, you'd want to go to thing, because the vowel is more closed, but an vowel in the mid voice is fine. So given what we've kind of established up to this point, I highly doubt he was thinking about vowel modification here, but just for future reference, if you are going to switch to another vowel in the mid voice, if you want to switch to an it's not the end of the world. The critique I would give up is that it kind of distorts the word. Can't see a thing, and if people don't know the words, then they might not be able to hear it, but it's metal, you're singing through a microphone, everything's super loud. People aren't necessarily there to get emotionally moved by the text that you're singing. So, I mean, I get that argument too. It's nitpicky, not the end of the world. Anyway, let's move on. So yeah, here, I've been skipping around a lot because actually this video isn't showing him as much as I'd like, and this is part of the struggle with finding a video of them from the 80s. I haven't really been able to find something that just consistently stays on his face a lot, so I've sort of been skipping so that I can just find places where I get a good view of him. You can see here that I stopped it kind of at a bad point, but when he does some of these vowels, you can kind of see his jaw move up, and you can kind of see some veins bulge out in the neck. And so what's happening is that's indicative of him using a lot of jaw tension. And that makes sense, because if I tighten my jaw, all my vowels kind of sound like this. And that's sort of the similar affect that he's creating when he's singing. I am certain that extraneous jaw tension has been a major factor in his vocal issues. If you clench your jaw really hard and then you touch up underneath it, it's like rock solid underneath your jaw, right? So when that happens, that's a byproduct of all these muscles engaging. And usually that means that the sound isn't just phonating and resonating naturally. The muscles are pushing with pressure. There's a lot of extra pressure coming from the top side of the folds to push the sound out. And what this ultimately does is it puts extreme strain on everything above the top of the folds. One thing you can call this is supraglottal pressure. A little bit of supraglottal pressure isn't bad, just like a little bit of subglottal pressure where you've got like air buildup underneath the folds isn't bad, but when it manifests itself with tension or push, you know you have too much. And there's a fine balance that you have to have between the amount of pressure above and below the folds to do it in a healthy way. And that's something that takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of practice toward the way that sound is engaged and comes out of the folds initially, and the way that you manage and maintain the consistency afterward. But ultimately, the idea is that when you have tension somewhere between where the folds engage and the mouth, there's kind of this force that's pushing the sound forward, so to speak. It also tends to lead to high larynx singing, because if you tighten up your jaw, it's very hard to move the larynx downward at the same time. It's so stiff that the larynx just wants to lock. And when the larynx locks up like that, you don't move it down. So when the larynx doesn't move down, the amount of space that's created in the vocal tract is stifled greatly. You need more space. There needs to be a little bit of a laryngeal tilt, like a pull down in the mechanism, so that the sound has more space to reverberate. And I've discussed this in other videos, if you don't have that space, you don't have that lower larynx, then all that work to make sound is placed on the folds and on the muscles. We have a vocal tract in here. We have the top of the back of the mouth. We have the throat that can open more in order to make sound travel more efficiently through it, so that the muscles and things don't have to push all that sound out. And we can kind of take that load off of the voice and off of the muscles. But when you tighten the jaw, it only just adds to that push, because the larynx can't move. And since the larynx can't move, the vocal tract can't expand. So that's effectively what's happening throughout a lot of his singing, and this is a very glaring example of it. When you look at how his neck bulges, that's a clear sign of jaw and neck tension. And when you do that for too long, eventually these muscles give out. It's just like I said before. Your muscles in your throat and your muscles in your vocal cords don't build back up the same way the muscles in other parts of your body do. They're very fragile. They're very easy to break. The voice is a somewhat resilient instrument in that it can take some punishment and recover itself pretty well, but it's extremely fragile in that if anything actually breaks, it's extremely difficult to repair. So you have to be mindful of this stuff. Someone warned James, I think in the early 90s, that if he didn't, get some of this stuff kind of worked out, he was going to damage his voice. And so a lot of people have complained that his singing went soft, in the 90s. It kind of wasn't as aggressive and wasn't as heavy and wasn't as hard. But I think that he made a good decision in doing that, even if it meant that people think that they sold out. I don't personally like Metallica's music in the early 90s onward as much as I like the music in the 80s. For my personal opinion, my opinion is that I'm not as big of a fan of the way their near music sounds. It's not so much his voice as it just is something about the structures of their music just doesn't grab me as much as their older stuff did. But either way, his vocal adjustments were clearly designed with vocal sustainability in mind. And the fact that he's made it this far into his 50s and can still somewhat perform is pretty good. He's a pioneer, and he was doing things that other people weren't doing vocally. So, of course, there's going to be some lumps along the way because this style of singing hasn't had a lot of study with regards to ways that you can do it effectively. Now, there are some teachers that you'll find on YouTube, and I've addressed some of them in videos before, that will argue all these things about, oh, it's healthy, it's sustainable if you do it X way. Don't listen to that stuff. And the reason I say that is that for every person that argues without peer review and without science behind them, without some kind of journal backing them up that these things are healthy, there are people with journal articles and with peer review saying that it's not healthy, and that the methods that these singers use have not been proven to be healthy or sustainable in any way. So it doesn't mean you can't do it. It just means that we don't have any real way yet of mitigating the inherent risks involved with singing with this level of aggression. So James was building a genre. He was building a new way of singing, a new way of doing things. So yeah, I mean, he's going to be a bit of a martyr. He had no way of really knowing what he was getting himself into. There have been so few studies on this style of singing even now, and there's been basically no studies on how you can maintain a 30-plus year career singing this way. There's been nothing done. So we don't know. So, of course, he had no way of knowing what kind of ramifications this is going to have on his voice in the long run. So I'm not sitting here faulting him. I'm not saying, oh, he's a terrible singer, terrible musician for doing it. Again, my purpose here is to show you some of the pitfalls that we do know have come out of this style of singing so that you can try to avoid them. Anyway, let's continue. So, if you notice when he said, blinded by me, you can't see a thing, he did that thing, that's a different melody than what's actually on the album. He took it down. That's a very common thing that singers do when they're tired. They have adjustments they can make to the melodies if they don't feel like they're able to sing it up at the normal register they recorded at. They'll have alternative melodies that they can go to. And so that's an example of him doing that there. It's not exactly the same as on the recording. It's totally fine that you do that, and it's good that he at least was, conscious and aware enough of his own voice at that point to know, like, I can't sing that in the high range right now. I've got to take that down. It's probably a good idea as a singer to have some kind of backup melodies that you can do that don't take away from the song. So that way, if you don't feel like you're at your vocal peak, you can at least fall back on them somewhat healthfully and somewhat sustainably. So that's a good adjustment that he made. But that's a sign of vocal fatigue too. Anytime you start hearing singers adjusting the traditional melodies of their songs, something's going on. Very rarely, unless the song has been completely rearranged, do you hear professional singers just change their melodies just because they want to. The reason for this is because the melody is something that we are drawn to first. The listeners hear the melody first and foremost, and that's kind of what keeps them listening. So what reason is there to take away from the thing that draws most listeners to it, unless you have something going on externally? And most of the time it's either someone's sick, they're not feeling well vocally, or they just don't think they can hit that particular part of the singing line efficiently that night. So he made an adjustment there, and that's fine. Kudos to him. Good on him for doing that. And I would recommend that to any of you who might, be singing and you know you're singing something that's vocally demanding for you. Few things here. So especially in that last line, when he sung just a rhyme without a reason, if you've watched any of my videos before, you know about the whole onset thing. When you have that pop sound in front of a word that starts with a vowel, when he sung the word just a rhyme, he did that he did that glottal pop. That's a sign of subglottal pressure. That's typically really bad for you. You guys have watched my videos and know how that works. Just check my bad singing habits video out if you want to kind of get a more in-depth detail of the onsets. But the just a rhyme, that was a glottal onset. That's something that you'd probably want to stray away from as a singer as well. The bigger thing that I want to point out here is when he sung just a rhyme without a reason, he went just a rhyme. So if you listen to that, just a rhyme compared to just a rhyme, if you make that vowel adjustment and you go ooh, 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 it tightens everything way up. And just those are just those are neutral vowels. The is a neutral vowel, and he's in the middle of his voice, so he's closing up as if he's moving into the passaggio range. So if you go back to that vowel modification diagram that I showed before, the those are more closed vowels than an Those vowels typically are better suited for moving up. So if you make a modification and close up more in the middle of your voice on a neutral vowel, you are creating tension because the folds want to stay more neutral. They don't necessarily need to have a more open resonator, a more open embouchure to make that sound. So it's probably not a conscious thing. It's probably the sound that comes out because he's tensing up his jaw, he's tensing up his throat. Everything's very tight. So because everything's tight and closed, these neutral vowels are coming out with the sound of closed vowels. So there you go. There's another example of the tension having a negative impact on the voice. If you unnecessarily tighten and close vowels, it goes back to everything I said before. Muscles engage where they don't need to. Over time, it causes damage. A recurring motif that I hope that you're seeing throughout this analysis is that James Hetfield has way too much tension, way too much push to be healthily sustainable. Okay, so that's sort of where I'm coming from all this. All the force, all the pressure, all the tension, all these things collectively build up over time and damage your vocal cords. Doing it for one night, doing it for 2 shows in a year isn't the end of the world. But when you make a habit out of touring and singing like this every single day, it will damage your vocal folds. This is why having healthy vocal fundamentals, healthy vocal habits is so vitally important, especially if you're a touring musician. It's so important. See, even right there, that was almost unintelligible because he said everything was really closed up. The embouchure was really tight. The vowels are really closed up. He's obviously got so much tension that his vowels are closed, and it's causing not only for the words to be unintelligible, but it also means that there's extra tension. So this is something that he's just developed habitually, is all this extra tension and tightness. So there you hear that he's not even singing the main melody anymore, and he kind of did a glissando. He kind of did that thing because he's having trouble even getting on the pitch in the first place. Typically when singers glissando, and it isn't, by glissando I mean slide, do that slidey sound. Typically when singers glissando and it's not in a vocal exercise, it's because they're trying to find a point of coordination in their voice, a comfortable point of coordination that they can actually carry up to whatever pitch they're trying to hit. So glissandos are usually a sign of marking. Marking is when you're taking things off of the voice to try to give yourself less strain because you're tired. So that glissando that he did just there is definitely a sign of vocal wear and tear, a sign of vocal fatigue. If you ever hear a singer that's really scooping around a lot when they wouldn't normally do it before, they're tired. So the fact that he's vocally fatigued and he's in the middle of the show, that's just nothing you can do about that. That's another reason why I argue that you shouldn't sing for more than maybe an hour and a half a day, and you should intersperse that stuff. You should have gaps between when you sing. I know it's easier said than done if you're a touring musician, but you should definitely compose your own music, write your own vocal lines in a way that they stay comfortable and healthy for most of the time, and you have a way that you can give yourself vocal breaks when you perform. Because songs like this, I mean, yes, there was a big instrumental section in the middle, but even so, a 10-minute long song where it's just like aggressive all the way through, that will ultimately catch up to you. Yeah, so right there, he had everything was really up like this. He's just working too hard. You don't have to make so much work. You don't have to work so hard to make the sounds that he's making. He could sing that. He's not even using rasp. He could sing that with a clean voice without tightening everything up. You don't have to do that. It's just too much work. This is why his voice has had issues. He's working way too hard. He's pushing way too hard. Vocal control, true vocal control, comes from freedom in the mechanism, not tightness. And so he's overcompensating for his lack of control with his body by forcing it all up here and tightening up and controlling it all. From a voice teacher's perspective, I can hear the tension. It's like nails on a chalkboard. And when you've worked with enough voices, you start hearing these things. It's almost like you can hear the work that people are doing. And James is working overtime to create these sounds when he doesn't have to. You don't have to work so hard to sing. It will catch up with you. It will bite you in the end. So yeah, he ends up with a nice, nice raspy fry growl thing that doesn't help your vocal health at all. Anyway, so that's the end of his singing. I know this is a longer video than normal, but there was a lot to go through with this. And if you made it all the way through and you're a James Hetfield fan, look, I promise you my goal is not to bash him. I'm not trying to just tear him down because he's a great musician. Metallica is an iconic band. They've made hundreds of millions of dollars. Who am I to talk? I'm some nobody sitting in my room making YouTube videos, right? I get it. I understand. I'm not bashing the band. I'm not bashing the music. I'm just trying to set people up to be successful in the long term. And James has been successful in the long term, but he's had to struggle way too much when he didn't have to. I guarantee you that if he had had some vocal instruction on some healthier habits from the beginning, he would have been able to find a way to mitigate some of these issues and maybe make himself not have as much trouble during his performances and not have to take so many vocal breaks where he's had to go without a tour for a year or have to go on vocal rest, or even there's been concerts where he's had to tell his audience, like, hey, I'm really working hard for you guys right now. This is very hard for me. Do you want to keep going? He's literally said that during his shows because he's running himself too hard. If you get a vocal nodule, that stuff most of the time, if it's bad enough, has to be laser removed. And the success rate on that is not that great when it comes to being able to come back and be a healthy, strong singer again. Look at Adele. Look at John Mayer. These are people. Look at Julie Andrews. Julie Andrews was also an iconic singer. She got a vocal nodule. The surgery didn't go too well, and her voice was shot. Adele's had vocal struggles ever since she's had her ruptures and her nodules and her surgeries. So these things are avoidable, but they also are pitfalls in every genre. Rolando Villazon, a tenor. He's one of my favorite operatic tenors. Pushed too hard, and he's had vocal injuries and vocal struggles. He's still relatively young in terms of the opera realm. This can affect anyone in any genre. There are things that you can do to avoid it. Don't push so hard. Don't work so hard. Singing can be free feeling. It doesn't have to be so hard. That's the number one thing that I want you all to take away from this. You have to be an effective, healthy singer, you have to learn to take the weight off and to be able to sing efficiently. If I sing a super loud, like operatic note, like if I do, if I do something like that, that's big and huge, right? It sounds really robust and it sounds really full and loud, but I'm not working that hard because I've learned to find ways to take strain off of the mechanism and still project. So you don't have to push to make things bigger and more aggressive and louder. There are alternatives that people have studied. We've done decades, we've done centuries of reviews and studies on the voice to find ways to sing more aggressively and more powerfully without taking load on it. You'd think people singing, the Ring Cycle by Wagner, that thing is hours long. You think people singing that can just go full blast all the way through? No. You have to manage your voice in a way to where your methods are sustainable. And that's the biggest thing that I want you all to take away from this. Anyway, I get really passionate about this stuff. I love this stuff. It's what I do for a living for a reason. I care more about vocal health and vocal pedagogy than pretty much any other topic on earth. So this is very dear to my heart, very close to my heart. I want all of you watching this to be able to sing for as long as you want with the freedom that you'd like. I don't want you to have these same issues that singers like James have had, and it's avoidable. You just have to take an approach of freedom and not force. I've said my piece. I've now analyzed a singer with poor vocal technique. I hope you're all happy. I hope you don't all unsubscribe from this. I hope you learned something. At any rate, for those of you who did enjoy this, I do have a Patreon. I will put the link in the description. I also give voice lessons. If you want to learn some of these healthier habits, I promise you that's my whole MO in voice lessons. Everything I do is focused around vocal freedom, vocal ease, and vocal health. I'm not going to try to turn you into somebody that you're not. I'm going to try to make your voice as healthy and as efficient as it can be. That's my whole approach. Don't listen to these other people on YouTube that try to say, oh, you can sing healthy and sound just like James Hetfield. Don't listen to those people. They're out there. They don't know what they're talking about. It's a sham. I'm not saying I'm the best voice teacher on earth, because I have my flaws. I have my issues as a singer. I'm not a perfect teacher. I have things I'm always looking to learn. I have things that I can work on myself. But I promise you that my perspective is coming from one of health and sustainability, whereas some of these teachers are just trying to get you to make a certain sound so that they can justify to you that you spent the money. So that's it. Please like, please subscribe. I hope you guys enjoyed this. I know it was long-winded, but this was hopefully in depth enough to where some of you can sort of get an idea where I'm coming from with the bad technique side of things. That's it. Thank you all for watching. I hope you all have a great day, and I'll see you all next week. Take care.